The Darkness Within, a Harry Potter sequel. Chapter 2. Harry held nothing back. As he sat facing his wife at the kitchen table, he told her how, for months, he had felt a looming sense of doom, of darkness approaching. His nightmares had changed. They had never stopped, not in the 19 years since the Battle of Hogwarts, but lately they had taken on a more vivid appearance. It was as if the part of his mind that had spoken to Dumbledore in the station was trying to communicate with him. There was a part of him that had walked on the edge of death and saw more than the rest of him. No magic had been able to recreate or replicate that state. His reaction to these things had been to double down on his work, to do his utmost to keep his family safe. And then, earlier that week, he had received news which confirmed his worst fears. He wondered if the dark thoughts, the animated nightmares, had somehow unconsciously foretold its coming. An old darkness was creeping back into their world. Something had gone wrong. Ginny sat back in her chair and took a deep breath in through her nose. "And no one else knows about this?" she asked. "Only the ones in my department who made the discovery." She stood up and paced the kitchen. "We need to tell the Order." "The Order? Ginny, the only people who knew are the Order. There's someone in there we can't trust." She turned to him. "Goodness, we tell Ron and Hermione then." Harry nodded. "I've already tested them both. They're themselves. I just didn't..." "Didn't what, Harry?" Harry stood up and put his hands on her shoulders. "I didn't want to involve you all. You've suffered so much and..." "Harry James Potter," Ginny said, throwing her arms around his neck. "I'm your wife, and Ron and Hermione are your family. We suffer together. No more keeping things to yourself." Harry began to mumble a response, refusing to meet her eyes. She nudged his chin up with her nose until he looked at her. "You don't have to deal with everything on your own. Deal?" Harry kissed her again. "Deal. We'll tell them tomorrow." That night, Harry was again plagued by nightmares. In this particular dream, he felt Pettigrew's silver hand on his throat. He couldn't breathe. Once a great friend of his father's, Pettigrew had betrayed James in the worst way possible, and then he had tried to kill his son. He saw Dobby's sombre face as the tiny elf lay dying. His expression displayed no regret for his sacrifice, but he was sad all the same, as it dawned on him that he would never see his friends again. He saw the giant statue of Salazar Slytherin in the Chamber of Secrets, the basilisk slithering from its open mouth. The giant snake hissed and turned to fire. From within the fire, Voldemort's haunting face appeared, sneering at Harry. He opened his mouth wide and howled with laughter, the dreadful sound echoing in Harry's ears as he jerked awake. He was twisted within the bed covers, and Ginny had her hands on his shoulders. She had been shaking him, trying to pull him from the nightmare. Harry felt a wave of fury wash over him, remnants of the time he and Voldemort had shared a mind, and Voldemort's emotions had affected his own. Voldemort was gone, but the mental scars he'd left had not healed. Perhaps they never would. Harry locked eyes with his wife, and after a few seconds, the anger faded. They both sat breathing heavily. "These dreams," said Ginny. Are they trying to tell you something?" "Could be," said Harry, "but I don't think so. I'm no Trelawney." The memory of their wacky teacher had them chuckling. Ginny laid down and Harry rested his head on her chest, focusing on her heartbeat to calm him. "Just a dream, dear," she said, stroking his hair. Harry hoped she was right. As he drifted back to sleep, he reflected on what she had said. He had, he thought, met death, and passed closer to the edge than any living person should have. Could he now see? Harry and Ginny apparated into the Weasley Granger front garden. The couple had built their own house a short distance from Ron's family home, and there was a stark difference. Whereas the Weasley family house looked as if it had been continuously added to, with little forward thinking, Ron and Hermione's house was sleek and well designed. Hermione had surely taken the lead when planning its layout, Harry thought. Hermione was busy cooking Sunday lunch, or rather, her wand was doing the cooking, while she buried her nose in a thick book. It was rare for the Minister for Magic to have time off, and Hermione used it predominantly to do two things: spend time with her family and read. She stood up when Ginny entered and beamed at the sight of her holding Harry's hand. Her smile faded when she saw how grave they both looked. "Oh God, what's happened now?" she said. Harry waited until Ron and Hermione were sat in their living room with cups of tea in their hands before he began. At first, he perched on the edge of the sofa, but as soon as he started speaking, he stood up and began his usual habit of pacing. "The Elder Wand has been stolen," he said. He paused and turned to his friends to gauge their reaction. They were both shocked, but he could see Hermione's quick mind already figuring out what that meant. "Someone within the Order," she said. A few seconds later, Ron caught on. "Impossible," he said. "There's no one in there I wouldn't trust with my life." "Nevertheless," said Ginny, "it's happened." Hermione raised herself from the sofa and faced Harry. Her demeanour changed. The Minister for Magic, not his friend, was now standing in front of him. "How long have you known?" she asked. "The Aurors we stationed there were killed a week ago," Harry replied. "I searched the hiding place myself. It's gone. We've been trying to track the thief, but with the Elder Wand, well, it's easy for them to hide." Hermione's expression hardened. "Why wasn't I informed of this immediately, Harry?" Harry met her gaze. "The less people who knew, the better. Only a handful in my department are aware. We didn't want rumours to start spreading, or to let the thief know we were onto them." Hermione huffed. "I knew I should have put my own people onto it. Your department is stretched too thin and—" She stopped talking when she saw Harry's expression. "I didn't mean... It's just, you all have a lot going on, with the World Cup coming. We could handle it, Hermione. We were prepared for every eventuality, except betrayal. No one outside of the Order, except for the Aurors responsible for the Wand's protection, knew where it was. Those Aurors are now dead." Silence filled the room. Harry continued. "We don't want to jump to quick conclusions. For all we know, someone in the Order let the location slip by mistake, or had too much to drink and blurted it out." "Well," said Ron, "there's only one thing for it. We called the Order together. If someone doesn't show up, we know it was them." "The Order hasn't met for years," said Ginny. "If we call them, it might alert whoever the thief is. Then they'll run, and we may never catch them. We need a more subtle approach." "What do you suggest?" Ron replied. Ginny exchanged a glance with Harry. "We invite them to visit, in small groups. We don't involve the Ministry, at least not yet." "And then what?" said Hermione. "Put Veritaserum in their tea?" "Exactly," said Harry. Hermione's eyebrows jumped up. "Harry, I was joking. The use of Veritaserum is strictly regulated. I'm not going to authorise—" "Hermione," Harry interrupted. "This is the Elder Wand. Have you forgotten what it can do? In the wrong hands? Even in the right hands, it can't be controlled. It can't be destroyed, and it can't be trusted. Using a bit of unauthorised Veritaserum is the least of our problems. That, combined with your spell, and we should be able to narrow it down until we find them. It's going to take time, and we don't have it, but we don't have a choice." Hermione sat down. She had developed a spell some years ago which revealed whether a person was under the Imperious Curse, without them or their controller becoming aware. It had ferreted out the lies of many of Voldemort's supporters who insisted they were not acting of their own free will. The Exposure spell had become a critical tool in the capture of dark witches and wizards. "We're talking about manipulating our friends," said Hermione. Harry shrugged. "Do you see any other way? It's been a long time since we all fought together. People change." Hermione opened her mouth, then closed it again. Harry continued. "I'm not suggesting evil intent. Maybe someone is in a bad place and they were desperate. Maybe they aren't thinking straight and they need our help. But we can't help them unless we know why they took it and where they are now." They all looked at Hermione. As Minister for Magic, she had the authority to overrule their plan. As their friend, she knew there was no one in the world she could trust more than the people in that room. After a few painstaking moments, she nodded. "Who should we start with?" she asked. The process of finding the truth would be a painstaking one, Harry knew. They risked alienating their friends, or worse, causing them to come to harm. They created a plan to eliminate any involvement, one person at a time. Many of the Order were living quiet, retired lives, and so it would be easy to coax into a visit. However, since some of the members currently worked at Hogwarts, and the school year had started, Harry would also have to visit the castle. Monday night arrived, and first on the list were Molly and Arthur Weasley. Harry was bad at acting, and decided his best tactic would be to say as little as possible during the dinner, to avoid giving anything away. Ginny, Hermione and Molly chattered away while Arthur questioned Harry about his new role. Now retired, it was clear that Arthur missed the hustle and bustle of the ministry. "First time we've hosted the cup since I took you all as children," Arthur said. "The team's working hard on security, I imagine." "Very hard," Harry replied. "We don't want to be embarrassed again. I've insisted, no muggles involved. I keep telling Hermione all those memory charms can't be good for the brain, but she insists it's harmless." Arthur nodded. "Yes, well, for their own sake, it's better if they're left out. They've got enough problems of their own these days, what with, what do you call it, the Facebooks and so on." Harry chuckled. "Something like that." Harry and Hermione waved their wands to clear the table, while Ron showed everyone a new toy he and George had developed, a pair of socks, one of which would disappear after a few hours and reappear somewhere else in the house. "Great idea for a Christmas gift," said Ron. "We based the idea on leprechaun gold, except the sock will always come back. In most cases." Molly tutted her disapproval while Harry and Ginny moved into the kitchen to prepare tea and cake. As the Weasley parents were distracted by Ron, Hermione jabbed her wand in their direction. An almost imperceptible beam of white light rose from the tops of their heads for a second, then disappeared. She nodded to Harry behind their backs. They were acting under their own free will. Ginny carefully poured 3 drops of Verita serum into her parents' teacups, while Harry stood guard at the kitchen door. As she waved her wand and the teas rose into the air, she paused. "This feels wrong, Harry," she said. "Testing my parents." "We aren't accusing them," Harry replied. "We just need to know if they told anyone without meaning to. Once we're sure they haven't, we needn't involve them anymore." Ginny sighed and swished her wand towards the living room. The teas flew towards the table and planted themselves on the coasters. Molly immediately took a sip, but Arthur was too distracted by Ron. My, you boys certainly have an active imagination. You seem much happier at the shop than you were as an Auror, Ron." He picked up his tea. Harry tried not to stare at it. "And I know it's a great comfort to George to have his brother working with him," Arthur continued, gesturing with the tea and spilling a little. "Oops, silly me, clumsy in my old age." He lifted the tea to his lips, then paused, noticing the intense way Ron stared at it. "What's the matter, Ron? Haven't put something in my tea, have you? Haha." Hermione kicked Ron under the table. He grunted and feigned a laugh. "Of course not, Dad. Only in Mum's tea." He grinned sheepishly. Arthur chuckled and poured some tea into his mouth. Hermione immediately sprang into action. "Arthur, Molly, there's something we need to discuss with you. The Elder Wand. You haven't told anybody where it was hidden, have you? Intentionally or otherwise?" The married couple's reactions were vastly different. At first, they both blurted out, "No," as if involuntarily. Then Arthur's expression was one of shock, and he shook his head slowly. Molly, on the other hand, grew angry and slammed her hand on the table. "Hermione Jean Granger, are you accusing us of betrayal?" "No, Mum, she wasn't," Ron said, leaping in. "We just thought, by accident, maybe." "Accident? How dare you? I have belonged to the Order since before you were born, young man. Be very careful." Arthur leaned over to his wife and took her hand. Now, Molly, don't jump down their throats. I'm sure they have a very good reason to ask us such questions." He looked from his children to Hermione and finally to Harry. Molly also turned to him. "Well?" she asked. Harry did not answer immediately. He had not planned to tell anyone what had happened beyond those who already knew, but now he thought about it, it was impossible not to without causing offence. He sighed. Molly and Arthur had passed all their tests. They were not the culprits. "The Elder Wand has been stolen," he said. "We don't expect you to help in finding it, but you know what it means as well as we do." Molly gasped and sat down. Arthur returned to shaking his head. Eventually, he said, "I knew the peace wouldn't last."